And today is a special day. Not only is it Friday, but it's also the day I get to learn more about how I have made mistakes on the show that you have shared with me in today's weekly Clark Stink segment. Is it tough for you to stand next to somebody who smells so badly all the time?
Oh my gosh. I love you not. This is Clark's relationship with self-checkout. First, Clark tells us not to use self-checkout because if we make a mistake, we'll be prosecuted for stealing. Next thing we know, Clark thinks self-checkout is the best thing ever because there's time to verify that the price on the screen is the price on the shelf. So which is it? Is self-checkout a cautionary tale or the new best way to save money? Nathaniel,
it is both. And that was a mixed message I gave about people being prosecuted. That was what the most stories about that were involving Walmart, where you may have misscanned something. I mean, they have a problem with people that are professional thieves or organized crime rings that will have fake barcodes and all that stuff. But it's when a retailer goes after someone who just didn't realize something scanned right or whatever and walks out the door, starts to walk out the door with something they didn't pay for, where an overzealous retailer overreacts to it and doesn't use good common sense and judgment. At the same time, the pricing errors in stores are so legendary. That's why I love self-checkout, because I'm able to scan at my pace, check each price, put the item over, and it's the best service in the world myself. But what I really love is the Sam's Club Scan and Go. It's so incredible. And what Uniglow does as well with the painless instant checkout much quicker than a human could do it.
Okay, so this one is a little outdated because you also picked on me this week for something similar. Clark stinks because he picked on Krista for buying bottled water and making her feel uncomfortable. Stop shaming her and allow Krista to buy whatever she'd like. She doesn't get on your case for needlessly traveling several times a week. Charles.
Charles, here's my water. For those of you on the YouTube show, you can see it. And Krista, you wanted to describe my water?
You have a big metal. I actually have my metal water bottle with me as well.
See, this is the smart way to do it.
So you're still picking on me, as this person thinks. He's not picking on me, by the way. It's all in jest. I don't care.
Krista and I pick on each other like brother and sister. And we always have. And so she doesn't pick on me during the podcast or YouTube show because people are really harsh on her if she says something needling me. So she's usually...
I do it off the air.
Yeah, exactly.
Clark, you don't really smell badly, but there's a whiff of forget-me-nots in the air. When you mentioned your credit card list of what you keep in your wallet, you left out Diners Club. I thought I remember you talking about having a Diners Club card in the past. Unless I'm mistaken, what happened to your precious Diners Club card, Jeff?
So Diners Club, the portfolio was sold to a Canadian company, and I think they still own it. And the benefits shriveled to being a tiny fraction of what they used to be. And so what did I do? I canceled the card. I had enough cards that I wasn't worried about it hurting my ratios or my credit history. And so I canned the Diners Club card. I used all the points, though, before I canceled the card.
Betcha. Clark, you stink like an untethered bank, pushing credit card rates higher and higher. You have mentioned more than once that a credit union card should have a lower rate than bank cards. I found that interesting, so I looked at the 4 cards I have. 3 banks and a credit union card. I found my credit union's rate was higher than any of the others. I called the number on the back of the card and asked for a lower rate. They were happy to lower it by 5 points, but only for 6 months as it was a promotion. I relayed what you said about credit union cards as they should be lower as a feature of being a credit union member. She said, "First I heard of it." Anyway, Remind your listeners that if they call their card issuer, they may get a lower rate. Bob.
Bob, thank you. All right, so credit unions versus banks. You're playing the numbers game. And there was a study that was pretty comprehensive that we gave the results of. We didn't do it, but it was done third party earlier this year, that found that the average credit card interest rate from a credit union was a little less than half, or the savings were a little less than half of what the average interest rate was on a bank-issued credit card. But there are hundreds, if not thousands, of credit unions, thousands of banks, and not every credit union is going to offer a better deal than a bank. Not every credit union is going to have the mentality that it's owned by its members, and therefore we must serve our members well. But as a general rule, those two things are true.
Clark continues to stink on his advice regarding not providing Social Security numbers to medical providers.
How many posts have you had on this?
Oh my.
Yeah.
While data theft is indeed a problem, it's not true that hospitals and healthcare systems don't care about information security. Many have quite large and expensive information security teams, but the pure number of such places, plus the intrinsic challenge of information security, means there are going to be these issues. Furthermore, healthcare providers need your social for more than just collecting debt. Electronic medical records and prescription safety databases are often keyed to your Social Security number and allow other providers to have a full picture of the treatment you've had, even from other places. This could be very important in an emergency where you can't provide this info yourself, and information about your past medical care and medications could influence emergency treatment you're receiving. People should freeze their credit and then provide their social when requested for a valid reason, and medical providers is one of those, in my view. Peter.
Peter, thank you, and I'm so glad you explained it the way you did. And I want you to think about something. Years and years ago, Congress, because of all the problems with data breaches and medical centers and the rest, forced private health insurers to go to medical record numbers that were different than Social Security numbers. And Congress did this as a way to prevent this problem going on in the medical industry. Well, what Congress did not realize at the time, I'm talking about Congress like a blob, is how often employers will change who the health insurance provider is and how often people change jobs, and there will be a different medical provider. And so I don't have an answer to this. I just know how dangerous it is, because with half of all data breaches being in medical facilities or from medical providers, it is a big, juicy target for criminals to go after the information available there. And if somebody's Social Security number is not on file, that record is not of use to them. The Social Security number is key and central to criminals being able to create havoc and mischief in your life.
Clark, you stink like my trash can after cleaning out old leftovers. Seriously, I'm surprised you're advocating for deregulating the energy sector, as you mentioned on an earlier segment. As an engineer in the industry, I actually support breaking up monopolies where appropriate. It makes sense to encourage competition, but breaking up monopolies and deregulation are two very different things. Deregulation of large profit-driven corporations often leads to negative outcomes. Trains derailing, forest fires from transmission lines falling after companies fail to maintain their hardware, and corners being cut to save money. Regulations keep your power on, ensure your drinking water stays clean, and are essential for public safety. They also keep utility rates in check as state boards regulate what companies can charge. Without those guardrails, companies would have free rein to gouge customers even more. What you left out when talking about deregulating in the 1970s is that it led to more mergers, less access to rail and power in rural areas, and sacrificing long-term reliability for short-term gains. People's wallets got hurt more than they benefited as a result. Jobs were cut, quality got worse, and people just flat out lost while corporations thrived. We need regulations as much as we need to challenge monopolies to ensure accountability and protect the public. Logan.
Logan, thank you. And I realize I hit a real hot button with you. And this is something I have a complete blind loyalty to, and that is the wonder and beauty of the free market. I am a big advocate for health and safety regulations. I think they are necessary to ensure that capitalism left completely to its own devices will cut corners on health and safety. There is no end environment, no doubt of that at all. As far as antitrust laws being enforced to prevent remonopolization of an industry, absolutely we should have that. But a marketplace, it is my belief, functions better when it is free market. One thing you don't mention is in so many states, the power companies, the monopoly power companies, have captured the political process to great harm to ratepayers buying electricity and potentially natural gas within that state because of the extreme political power and the corruption of money going to politicians in that state. And when you look at what's happened with power rates in states that are monopoly controlled in its political process, those rates have gone up, up, up and away. And where the market is competitive, those rates have gone much lower than they are in the regulated states. It is just a strong belief I have in trusting the wisdom of the free market and free enterprise. I just believe in it so much. And yes, there are times I miss, with my blinders on, I miss possible negative consequences. It's just an obsession of mine having free markets.
Clark Stinks pointed out to Clark that there are IRS regulations that determine whether a person is an employee or an independent contractor, and that the parties can't just select one based on what will save the most tax. Clark said he wouldn't worry about that because it's very unlikely a small business will be audited for that issue. How far does Clark go with his philosophy that you don't need to follow the law if it's unlikely you will get caught? Is Clark in Costco and just sees there are no employees or cameras around? Does he just slip the AIM toothpaste into his pocket? Harry,
thank you. The dilemma that's gone on with lawsuits, legislation, court fights about who's an employee, who's an independent contractor. Just think about the fights that have gone on around the country about whether Uber and Lyft drivers are independent contractors or employees. This is one of the hardest parts of the economy, and that's why something that was suggested by an economist about 5 or 6 years ago is something that I have been really in favor of, is us having a third classification that really fits something like Uber and Lyft, and that's a dependent contractor. That you have something in between these two polar opposites of somebody who's an employee, somebody who's an independent contractor. The distinction of a dependent contractor is that, let's say I'm driving for Uber, and Uber now has 75% market share. Lyft has become somewhat irrelevant in most major markets. So I am completely dependent on how Uber sets down policies, what they choose to pay me, all the rest. And maybe you're not truly an employee, but you're also not truly an independent contractor. And that's the idea of this middle ground of dependent contractor.
But you don't believe in breaking the law.
I don't believe in breaking the law for sure. I pay my taxes as I'm supposed to. And whenever there's a question, I pay more because I can never cut a corner because it's just not what I should do.
Clark, in a time of record housing unaffordability, you can spare us the lecture on 15-year mortgages. While obviously true that a 15-year mortgage has benefits over the 30-year, it's especially tone-deaf and irrelevant to point that out in today's market, which has all but ground to a halt, with home prices having outpaced wage growth so dramatically in recent years. Read the room, Clark. If no one can afford to take your advice, then your advice stinks, Chad.
Chad, thank you very much. All right, so Chad, what I've said about that is dovetails with what you've said, that for most people, when I talk about the 15-year loan, it's an irrelevant choice because the payments are already so high, and you'd be looking at a payment roughly 20% higher per month. But who I'm focusing on with that are people who are already in a home loan with a higher rate. They've been able to afford the payments. They've been paying them over time. And now the 15-year loan is in the 5-point-something% range, depending on the day. Somewhere, it's in the fives. That the interest rate drop may be enough that somebody's able to afford going out of a 7-point-something loan to a 5-point-something loan and have that 15-year pay period instead of the 20-year with the 30-year with the 2-point lower interest rate. They may be able to afford it. That's the context, and I don't give that context every time, but your point is completely valid. People are wheezing trying to afford that higher payment every month.
Clark, you stink so much that you can't smell the lovely aroma of homemade soup. For health reasons, of course, you should avoid canned or packaged soup with its excessive amount of sodium and other unhealthful additives. But it's easy and fun to make your own soup at home. You can adjust any recipe, leaving out the salt, using low-sodium chicken broth, no salt-added canned beans, etc. Try it, Judy. And let me tell you something, Clark. Judy was one of at least 10 people who wrote in about this, about the soup specifically, that you can make your own soup and there is low-sodium soup. You hit a nerve.
All right, so, I weigh every day. I got to tell a soup story. So we were at a restaurant, and on Sunday, I break training, and I eat pretty much what I want. But I also try to be careful with sodium. But we were at a French restaurant, and they had this onion soup that people just rave about. So I get the onion soup, and the next morning, how much weight had I gained temporarily? Obviously.
You told me, so I'm not going to.
6 pounds. 6 pounds from that bowl of soup because of all the sodium. So, Judy, you are right. If I was not the laziest man in the world, it's not just the soup. We've had people write in about the problem with spaghetti sauce having high sodium. Mm-hmm. There was another thing I talked about. Oh, salad dressings.
Yeah.
Salad dressings.
But the soup hit a major nerve.
But
What's your favorite kind of soup?
We've heard about all these things.
What's your favorite kind of soup?
Oh, where do I start? So I mentioned the onion soup. Mm-hmm. I love potato soup. I love clam chowder. I love lobster bisque.
Do you like tomato bisque?
Yeah, I love tomato bisque.
I'm going to make you a low-sodium
But since I'm a southerner, you have to say tomato bisque. You can't say tomato.
You say tomato, I say tomato. Okay.
And?
I don't think you stink, but when a mother asked about obtaining an unsecured $30,000 loan for her soon-to-be physician daughter, you didn't mention military opportunities. The Air Force and perhaps the other branches offer something called the Financial Assistance Program, FAP, which is designed to recruit physicians in residency training. Folks in the FAP receive an annual bonus as well as a monthly stipend. I took advantage of this program in the late 90s and it worked out well. I incurred a 42-month commitment for participating in the program, but I ended up staying in the U.S. Air Force nearly 20 years longer. It's definitely something worth looking at, Mike.
Mike, thank you very much for your, what would that be, 23 years and 6 months of service to our great nation. And the military branches are facing a severe shortage of personnel now at all levels of education, training, and skills. And we are in a time that the world is looking a little less safe than it has in a while. And know that Uncle Sam needs you in the U.S. military, and there are benefits, just like you stated, for someone completing their medical training and going into residency to serve our great nation and have the nation relieve you of a lot of those bills.
Hello, Mr. Howard. Just kidding. I have been listening to the show for 10 plus years and have held my tongue, but I need to finally vent. I'm a lifelong Michigander and more specifically a Motown boy, and I cringe every time cars are brought up on the show. I always know what Clark will say, buy Toyota or Honda or even Kia. Why is there never, ever, not ever any love for the American car companies? I know you love Tesla, but I put them in a category of their own. I have only owned American cars my entire life and have not regretted it. Please show some love to GM, Ford, and Chrysler. I know that one's not technically American anymore. I still love the show and appreciate your great insights. And P.S., my son is a fellow Chippewa. Fire up chips, Alex.
What Alex is referring to is Central Michigan University, where I got my master's degree. And, when you hear me talk about the car brands, it's based on customer satisfaction and record of repair and Consumer Reports recommendations. And on the scales they use, unfortunately, the two American brands, in addition to Tesla, GM and Ford, and the European-owned Stellantis, have not measured up as well when they're put head-to-head generally with other models. So that's why, Alex, I've said it. I'm not smart enough to tell you what makes a good car and what's not, because my mechanical knowledge is very poor. So I have to base it on the research and data of others, and that's why when you hear me read from those lists, you hear particular brands.
Moving on to the next stink. Nothing too stinky, but on a recent podcast, you talked about your Costco Visa card being, quote, duplicated, but you still had your real card in your possession. You did not explain how a credit card gets duplicated. Thanks to you, my credit is frozen, so new cards can't be issued, but now I'm worried about a duplication. Is it simply a matter of procuring the victim's card number and security code on the back of the card? Thank you for all you do, Brian.
Yeah, Brian, that is it. There are various times. There's even been problems. This is terrible to say. Most everybody who works in a restaurant is honest, but there are people who get paid at restaurants who are servers who, when they take your card to run it, they also surreptitiously run it through a little device on their phone that captures stuff, and then they sell off the information with the code and the expiration and the number and blah, blah, blah. There are many different ways that card numbers get intercepted. Of the forms of identity theft, this is the least serious of all. Account takeover fraud of a credit card is just a little bit of a hassle. You get a new card, new number. You're not responsible for any of the fraudulent charges, as long as you stand up for yourself within 60 days.
Small criticism. I heard you suggest online banks as a way to increase your FDIC protection. These non-bank online companies that dish out your money to several real banks are at the mercy of the software platforms of the actual transactions. I'm sure you're aware the recent bankruptcy of one of those companies brought down a number of non-bank companies that pretended to be banks, and a lot of consumers have lost access to their funds. There are better ways to increase your FDIC protection than these non-bank online companies that look like banks. For example, the couple could have a joint account and then separate accounts for each of the partners, and all three accounts would have $250,000 in protection. Keep up the great work, Mark.
Mark, thank you, and that is true. The way you have accounts titled magnifies your $250,000 or multiplies your $250,000 in protection. What I've talked about in the past, what was called the CDARS program and is now called something else, is where you go to an FDIC-insured bank that's a participant in this correspondent banking program. You're not going through a non-bank intermediary like the problems that happen with Synapse and a lot of the apps. What you're doing in that case, it's called IntraFi now. Mm-hmm. When you go to an IntraFi participating bank, it's FDIC insured, your money goes into them, and then they use a record-keeping program to split your deposit out to fellow FDIC insured participants in the program, and you're never with any non-FDIC insured non-bank intermediary.
Clark, you smell like my shirt after a 3-hour run. When you suggest buying 2 separate flights to save money to a destination, most recently suggesting flying to the West Coast first, then on to Japan, you must let people know that the dangers of this plan. Specifically, if your first flight is delayed or canceled and you don't make your second flight, you will be treated as a no-show for the second flight and the entire round trip will be canceled. You are at the mercy of the second airline and they are not obliged to do anything for you. You're stuck at the intermediate point unless you can afford the price of a walk-up ticket. Your entire vacation will be lost. Additionally, if you're checking luggage, you need to leave the secure area to retrieve it and recheck it. Make sure your listeners allow plenty of time for all of this. Ray,
and maybe the last time I talked about it, when I talked about why we did the 2 tickets to Japan to cut the price by 60% of the trip, we went out a day ahead. I liked when I'm going to do an over-the-water trip to somewhere else, to another continent, and I'm going to go to an intermediate city to cut the cost by a fortune, I do an overnight in that city so that if there is a flight cancel, I'm not going to misconnect. I don't have to worry about check bags because I don't check a bag. I do carry-on only. But your point about the bags, true as well. On the return from Japan, instead of an overnight coming back, the domestic flight cost, relatively speaking, is so small that I do take the risk. And I had a 3-hour connect time from Japan Airlines to a U.S. domestic airline. In that case, it was Delta, back home. So I am willing to roll the dice on the return. I don't roll the dice on the going. And with cruises, I should mention as well, with cruises, always arrive in the port at least 1 day before the sailing of a cruise. Because if you miss the cruise, you miss the whole vacation because of a flight problem.
Okay. Why are you such a fearmonger when it comes to gift cards? You make it sound like 90% of the gift cards on the shelf are tainted. I've never had a problem with them, but I only buy and use a few a year. My wife, who works at school, gets dozens of them a year from students and parents, which I'm sure are bought off the shelf, and she has never had a problem. If gift cards are so unsafe, then the manufacturer, distributor, and retailer of the gift cards would address it. I bought a high-dollar gift card, $500, the other day, and was surprised by the security on the envelope it was in and the hologram printed on it. To tell people what to be aware of is okay, but to tell them that they're lucky they are not taken on every purchase is absurd. Larry,
thank you. Mathematically, you're probably right that I am an alarmist on the gift card thing. It's happening so much, and the industry knows that what's known as card draining is a very fast-growing crime, and there are all these software packages that crooks are able to buy very cheaply that help them drain these cards. So it is a chance of odds. If you took $500 and you bought a card and it turned out that it was worth $0, you would not be happy. And it wouldn't have to happen to you every day. But if it happened to you that the $500 was of your hard-earned money was now $0, you'd be upset and you'd be, why didn't Clark ever tell me about that? So yes, maybe I make it sound more draconian than it actually is, but it's important that people know that the gift card system is not secure at this point in the United States, and that the danger is ever present that you buy a gift card and you got nothing to show for it.
so if you're going to buy one, buy it from behind, like you have them activated at the store or restaurant or wherever it is, or you can get a Costco card. They're kept in the cage. If you're buying gift cards at a place like that or a warehouse club.
But the unprotected racks are where these problems are occurring overwhelmingly.
Please stop beating up on Vanguard, or at least give some more perspective for your listeners who continue to whine about Vanguard customer service. I've been a Vanguard investor for 8 years, and I am very happy with their services and low-cost investing platform. Maybe that's because I've gone to the trouble to use the online systems which are available and very helpful if a person is willing to take the time to learn to use them. My sense is that the complainers are the same folks who want their hand held by a person on the phone, or like you, still want paper statements. These things are fine if that's what you want, but they cost money and add expense to Vanguard's overhead. People who expect these additional services should be willing to pay for them. This will keep investing fees to a minimum for those willing to use their online tools and systems. I'm a regular listener and enjoy and appreciate your podcast, James.
James, thank you. You know, I love Vanguard. And to talk about the customer no service issues at Vanguard is painful for me because I love what Mr. Bogle created there. I love what they have been able to do to democratize investing. I mean, really, two people in this country changed investing in this country. One is Chuck Schwab, and the other is John or Jack Bogle. Some people like to call him John, some like to call him Jack. And they are the ones that really changed what had been a rich person's club, really a rich men's club.
It might be time to update the prescription on those Zenni glasses. You recently read the Consumer Reports article about the 5 and 10-year used car reliability. The list you read for the most reliable was correct, but you read the wrong brands for the least reliable. The least reliable brands, according to Consumer Reports, are Chrysler, Dodge, your beloved Tesla, Jeep, and Ram, then Ford. I'm betting you didn't get the full list when you initially read it. Love the show, Stephen in North Carolina.
Stephen, thank you if I made a mistake on that, and I apologize. First, I should address the beloved Tesla. Tesla's record of reliability has always been an issue for them. They design really incredible vehicles. They're not that reliable, and it's because Tesla had no competition for so long in electric vehicles, and now they do, and their market share is falling even as they sell more electrics. And that's an area they're going to have to work on, is making them more reliable. And Chrysler and Dodge, and Jeep and Ram are all Stellantis vehicles. And Stellantis is a company which is a European company that owns them, is going through a real crisis around the world. Their sales are falling around the world, and no place more than here in the United States. And the quality issue matters.
Clark, you stink like the new college athletics super conferences. I worked at a public regional university for nearly 20 years, and our state legislature, which previously funded 70% of our operational budget with 30% from tuition, dramatically cut funding and told us to raise tuition, resulting in big tuition hikes. This happened at public colleges nationwide. Also, contact college financial aid offices directly for help with financial aid, scholarships, and little-known tuition waivers, a way to reduce your tuition. Paul,
thank you. And this trend started during the Great Recession. The state legislatures, starved for revenue, decided to reduce the funding formulas that legislatures had provided to state-supported colleges in many states. Not all, Paul, but in many states, what you say is true. The good news today is that something I brought up recently is that college costs are actually declining in the United States as a percent of family income, except for the most elite schools in the United States, as more and more individuals, potential students and their families question the value of college. Colleges, and they're playing hard to get, colleges are having to cut costs to students. It also means they're having to cut their costs of operations. In many cases, majors that are not highly sought after at that school are being eliminated, that kind of thing, in order to make college more affordable so that people will feel more comfortable going to college.
Clark, you stink like a porta potty sucker truck. Ugh. Not
wow.
really.
But that one's fun.
Said not really, but your man from Roth explanations need a little bit more thorough analysis. While it's easy to believe that tax rates will go up, they almost certainly will, deciding Roth versus traditional should involve at least two other factors to decide which to use. One, when contributing to a Roth, money goes in at a marginal tax rate. In your case, you say up to 24% Fed rate. However, one must consider that when taking money out of a traditional IRA or 401k in retirement, it would come out across multiple marginal rates, usually at lower income levels, leading to an average tax rate much lower. And 2, you say nothing about state taxes. While we are guessing about future tax rates, we might as well guess about where we will retire. Roth contributions would be taxed at the state marginal rate. However, many states provide all or significant exclusions for retiree income. That must be considered when deciding at what marginal rate one would be a candidate for a Roth. Lane.
Lane, thank you very much. And I love it when my wife posts. Clark
Spelled
says,
differently.
Yeah,
Spelled differently.
just kidding. Anyway, this is one I'm just trying to get people to look at because people by default go into traditional, particularly traditional 401ks. I find more and more people are automatically choosing Roth IRAs, but for the 401k, where often people will have more money going in each year, people are still, by and large, doing traditional. And so I bring up the tax rates and all that so that people who are not earning a huge amount of money will consider and maybe adopt doing the Roth 401k. But the big thing that I love about the Roth IRA is that effectively you're saving a lot more money for retirement if you max out, because if you max out a traditional, you're only saving this amount of money pre-tax, and it'll eventually be taxed. And the Roth, you're putting in post-tax dollars. So effectively, every year you're saving 20 or so % more money for retirement effectively than you would be otherwise.
You had a caller asking what would happen to their credit balance on their card since they have a trip canceled and they were refunded. Your answer was that they would eventually be issued a check in 30 to 60 days. In my experience, most issuers you can just call and have a check mailed for free. Why wait and loan the card company this money, Pete?
Pete, that is a valid point that a lot of issuers will automatically send that check, but if you ask for it sooner, depending on the issuer, they will cut that check.
You may have stepped into something. As a financial planner, you missed the mark on the differences between the way advisors are paid. On the podcast, you recommended that people should use a fiduciary fee-only advisor because they only charge a flat fee or hourly fee and no AUM fee. However, this umbrella of advice definitely does include AUM fees. This is important to mention since the vast majority of great advisors are in the AUM model. It is the simplest and most appeasing fee to clients. It's simply just a model for compensation. A 1% fee could be more than worthwhile than a 1% fee elsewhere, since financial planning spans into every area of your life, and hopefully you aren't getting charged just for some of your data to get plugged into an investment portfolio. If you want to recommend fiduciaries, you might want to recommend registered investment advisory firms, RIAs, and the CFP marks, since both are bound to the fiduciary standard, and CFPs have at least a base level of competence. Keep on rocking, Clark. Blaine.
Blaine, thank you. I don't know what I said that that AUM, that people paying 1% means they're not a fiduciary. If I said anything that made it sound like that, I obviously know that someone who's paid 1% of assets can be either a fiduciary or not, and quite often they are fiduciaries. And that versus fee only, which is obviously what I'm into, is a fee only is like somebody who you're paying assets under management. So this is an area we get so frustrated about explaining because the industry, financial services industry, makes it hard for people to be able to understand that what a fiduciary is, when somebody's a fiduciary. Simply the term fiduciary means however they are paid, whether they're paid an hourly rate or they're paid 1% of the amount of money they're managing for you. The key thing is that they are legally bound as a fiduciary to do only what is best for you, not what might line their pockets, like happens with any insurance company you ever deal with. If there's any insurance company that's operating with its salespeople as fiduciaries, I'd love to know that exists.
I love the RIA advice, though, Registered Investment Advisory Firms. That's a good one. Clark, you recently advised people to always book a hotel room that is fully refundable. Then, just a few calls later, you reminded people what a ripoff an extended warranty is. With great wisdom, you almost always suggest people self-insure with confidence in cases where the potential repair cost wouldn't do financial harm. In my humble opinion, doing a non-refundable hotel room for a typical travel date saves me at least 10% of the room cost. So I use your self-insurance model in this hotel booking situation, and I've come out way on top in the long run. No, you don't stink, but perhaps you were inconsistent on this one, Ron.
Ron, thank you. All right, so what is the reason I do not like non-refundable hotel rooms is because hotel rates tend to come down in most cases close to arrival. So if you book a hotel far in advance, yeah, you could lose all your money if your trip later cancels, and that's one reason not to book a non-refundable room. But the bigger reason is that hotel rates flex so much that if I've got a booking and it turns out to be the best rate there is, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, I could have saved 10% if I would have booked non-refundable, but most of the time what I'm saving is getting a much lower rate by rebooking close to arrival. I do book non-refundable rooms when I'm booking for the next day, couple days out or whatever, because I'm not worried about anything about finding a better deal later or whatever. But when I'm booking further out, I want the opportunity to reshop those room nights.
Clark, you really stunk it up when you told a listener to invest in a taxable account via Fidelity Zero Funds instead of continuing to contribute to their 401k. Taxes aside, what you didn't consider is that under federal law called the ERISA, Employee Retirement Income Security Act
of 1964 or whatever it is, yeah.
401k accounts are shielded from creditors, some bankruptcy judgments, and civil lawsuits such as liability claims. 1% in fees could end up being a very small price to pay compared to losing every dollar in that taxable account due to a liability claim against the listener. Logan.
Logan, thank you. And I want to point out the distinction that matters in a lot of states is that money in an IRA is at risk from a lawsuit in many states where money in a 401k is not. And so liability risk exists with most money that we have, most possessions we have, most assets we have. And that's why if somebody has had the success tax where you've managed to save a lot of money, invest a lot of money, I'm so into making sure you have enough liability coverage. And if you got a lot of money, you really need to have an umbrella liability policy sitting on top of everything where you protect your assets from what could be a financially ruinous lawsuit that could destroy what you built up over the years.